So Human Rights Watch has had to close our offices in Egypt, Libya, and Yemen. Basically, it's due to the political and security situation throughout the Middle East that has led to a dramatic shrinking of space for civil society. In Libya and in Yemen, it was more generalized risk towards our staff because of the war situation that made it very dangerous to maintain staff there 24/7, particularly international staff, where there's not only violence from the generalized war, but also specific kidnapping risk of having foreign nationals present permanently in the country. In Egypt, we had security agents outside our offices at many hours. We used to have a pretty large office in Cairo. But following the coup in Egypt, there was a very strong push from the government, pressure against us, lawsuits against us, threats against us that led us to have to shut our office down and unfortunately had to let go our Egyptian staff and move our non-Egyptian staff out of the country. So one of the focuses of our World Report launch this year was the dramatic shrinking of civil society space in Egypt, particularly since the rise of General Sisi to presidency in the country. It's become a very inhospitable environment that's on top of the arrests and detentions of journalists, of other activists, of writers, actors, musicians, artists. The net of unacceptable expression in Egypt has grown broader and broader so that it doesn't just touch on political issues or political expression, but any expression that is independent, that is not towing the government line of acceptable expression. So what we've seen in the past few years as Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has engineered his rise to power is an extreme concentration of power in the hands of the Crown Prince, in the hands of the royal court that is really beyond precedent in Saudi Arabia. What I think is particularly unprecedented for Saudi Arabia is the very serious reports of torture and abuse of the detained women activists, including sexual harassment, sexual assaults. What their arrests reflects is opposition to anyone in Saudi Arabia having an independent voice, particularly a voice that is making demands on the government as citizenry. We have been on the ground in Yemen documenting the military campaign that has been launched in the country since Mohammed bin Salman assumed the post of Minister of Defense. So unfortunately, there are wide-scale abuses by all parties to the conflict that have had disastrous consequences for the Yemeni civilian population. Not only the killing of Yemenis, but due to the closure of Yemen's ports and their inability to import fuel, medicines, food, causing wide-scale disease, cholera at epidemic levels, and now famine conditions throughout the country. Unfortunately, I don't think that these conflicts are going to come to an end in this country, nor are the assault of governments against their own citizens in their desperate bid to maintain their power at all costs, and from their perspective, seeing their own citizenry and their populations, the voices of their citizens as threats against the government, as existential threats against the survival of these governments. I don't see that significantly abating in the coming year. So what we can do, what we hope to do, is to continue to stand by people, to continue to stand by the victims of human rights abuses, to support the work of local activists, local journalists, local writers who are struggling, sacrificing, and still making an enormous contribution to keeping what remains of civil society alive in these countries. They will be the hope for future generations in the Middle East and North Africa.